right, this video is from Mr. Russell's AICE European History students at Apopka High School. We're going to go quickly. You can pause at any point you want to take down notes. We're going to skip all this stuff about the Neolithic Revolution. It was fun telling the Barry story and all these original stories. All right, what were the causes of the Industrial Revolution? Number one, the Agricultural Revolution. And it happened, there was an early Agricultural Revolution, the Neolithic Revolution. This is the later one that occurs around the mid-1700s or early 1700s. Started in Britain, and there were large parts of England where they were starting to develop manufacturing industries. And this is the overall picture. There were new forms of transport to bring in raw materials and convert them to finished goods and then ship them out to other places to sell them. In 1750, clothing was made in homes, a few meters a day, but by 1850, that's the two bookends that bookend our time period, 1750 to 1850. By the end of this, there were huge steam-powered machines in industrial cities making thousands of meters of cloth a day. And this industrialization led to rapid urbanization. All right, so, which caused more population, income growth. There were social changes. These are overall effects. If you lived on a farm, and you wanted to get married, there was probably a very small circle of suitors for you. But if you moved to the city, there's a lot more people there for you to get interested in. And your parents probably had a lot less control over the situation. There were also political changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution. And aristocracy was no longer able to dominate the parliament and government of England. Now, is it a revolution? Well, it's not like the three big ones that occurred previous to this, the American, the French, and the Haitian. And there's not a lot of people who died. There were people who died in industrial accidents. But it is a more important and longer lasting effects had by this revolution than any of the others. Had a bigger impact over time. And Britain was fortunate in 1750 to have advantages for industrialization. We're going to go over them. What were the British advantages? They had a good agricultural system. Their people were generally healthy, comparatively speaking, and they were willing to move to get a job. The banking system and the currency were stable. The British currency was then, and it still is, the British pound, P-O-U-N-D. Our currency here is the dollar. Other countries like Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, they call their currency the dollar. Mexico calls it the peso. But the British currency was the pound. Capital is money. And there was capital available, and there was the willingness to invest it. What's the old saying? No pain, no gain. No risk, no reward. So people with money would invest in a business adventure. They would risk their money. But there was also a chance of a pretty good return. And in England, there was an increasingly wealthy population willing to buy luxury goods being produced and imported. So they're bringing in stuff from other countries. And they're also making stuff in England and shipping it out. So there was this big international trade starting to begin, and England was at the center of it in Europe. England was never far. Wherever you were in England, you were never far from a navigable waterway, which means you could move up and down the waterway with a ship. There was an enormous supply of coal. I brought in a lot of camping stories. I'm going to skip all this for this lecture. What were the development in agriculture? So here's the major changes. We're going to go over them in detail. I don't know if we're going to go over the cereal cultivation, but if you just think of this, your favorite breakfast cereal and what it's made out of, these, I don't know about rye, but certainly there's corn flakes. There is certainly cereals made out of wheat and barley and oats. Oatmeal is made out of oats. That's why they're called cereals. Okay, all right, so what do we got? The big thing is the enclosure movement. So in medieval Europe, they had the open field system. So if you lived in a small town or outside the town, there was open land. You could just go out somewhere and start a garden. Nobody could stop you. But what happened was, as time went by, the farms got bigger. Poor people couldn't afford to farm 100 acres. So the rich people are farming them, or at least the middle income people. And they would go to Parliament and they would say, listen, we are going to bring in all these new agricultural improvements in machines and fertilizer. We can't afford to have the poor people on our property. We need your permission to put up fences. And so they enclosed their properties. And England's government was always willing to help the rich over the poor. So what happened was they enclosed the lands. The small farmers, the poor farmers, lost their rights. Many of them went from having a small farm to moving to the cities as landless laborers and working in the new factories being built as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Between 1750 and 1800, 7 million acres of land were enclosed. Now, the good news about this is farming was more efficient, so food got cheaper. And again, I tell my students, you always got to look at the good and the bad. The cheaper the food, the better the food is and the cheaper it is, that's going to help poor people, and that's going to help rich people too. So on one hand, the poor people are being pushed off the land they were using. On the other hand, it's cheaper for them to eat. And many of them made more money working in the factory system in the crowded, polluted cities than they made working on the farms. All these things led to urbanization. Okay. Improved soil fertility. Originally, they used fertilizers, and most of them was manure. And the example I always talk about from my youth was cow manure. And they could take manure and take soil, which was not very rich, plant crops, and put manure over it, and all of a sudden the soil would become productive. And as time went by, they became very smart about what they farmed, and they studied farming. You can get a degree, in agriculture. We have a university at one point, FAMU, Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. University of Florida has a big agricultural research center over near Apopka. It's pretty well known for the agricultural studies they do. So you can study agriculture in college and become a much more productive farmer. Here is the famous cow manure fertilizer you can buy at Walmart and Tractor Supply and Home Depot and Lowe's. They rotated the crops. Slash and burn was what they used to do before they invented crop rotation. And so they go through stages. They have the 3-field system. Fallow is where you leave your land vacant, and you let weeds and trees grow up on it after you farmed it for several years. And after you let it lay fallow, then you either plow all that stuff under or you burn it and the soil is rich again. So you farm 3 or 4 years, the soil becomes poor, you let it lay fallow again. Eventually they had a 4-year cycle. They would farm wheat, barley, clover, and turnips. And some of these things like clover and oats would actually put nutrients back into the soil. Okay, and turnips also make good animal feed. This is called crop rotation. And here's the 4 years. All right, improved livestock breeding. This picture shows a dog's face and a wolf's face. And dogs were selectively bred from wolves. Now, it took many centuries to do that, to go from a wolf to a chihuahua, but there you go, or a poodle. So what they do is as far as cows and pigs go, they wanted bigger animals to produce more meat and have higher quality meat. So they would selectively breed prime animals to get better animals. Okay, I don't know any better way to say that. There were some links between agriculture and industry. Obviously, the more food you had, the more energy people had, the healthier they were, less sick, and they would make good factory workers. So these kind of played off. People worked in the factories. You have a lot more people around each other. They have more babies. The babies are healthier, live longer, food is cheaper. Eventually, you're going to have a population explosion. Okay, here's the key thing. Capitalism. Dirty word to a lot of people today. It is what made England and the United States great. People that had money would take their extra money and invest it. And Britain had country banks and respected lenders with low interest rates. And what a lot of the English had done was invest in overseas trade, and they made big profits. So if you work and you save $10 a week, you can put that extra $10 in the bank and make a little bit of money. But imagine if you made an extra $10,000 a month. Invest that. A little money makes you a little money. A lot of money makes you a lot of money. So the rich continue to get rich. And they're looking for places to put their money to make greater profits. And that is going to fuel capitalism. And again, for a lot of people who like capitalism, there's a good side to it and a bad side. You get better made goods, cheaper goods. But of course, a lot of bad stuff happens as well, like pollution to the environment, unsafe working conditions. At the end of Unit 2, we're going to talk about British attempts to clean that up, to treat the workers better, to make their jobs safer. It's going to be a long, hard fight. But like most things in life, there's good things about it and there's bad things about it. Many aristocrats who were trying to improve their profits had coal mines on their land, and they would invest in roads and canals to lower costs and increase their profits. And the key word here is surplus money. Now, I know some of you watching this video are probably not my students, but my students played the stock market game. And so I taught them that this is what you do with your extra money. You go out and seek a place to put your money so it makes you a greater profit. And in the meantime, you're giving people who are starting businesses the money to invest. And that's surplus money. Poor people don't generally have the kind of money to do that. Another advantage the British had is they set up insurance companies. So a lot of times you could invest your money and then insure it, which meant if your profit, you lost your business venture, you could get some or maybe most of your money back. All right. So here's rivers and canals. When I was a scuba diver, they taught us if you're underwater in the ocean looking for a wreck, because, when there's a shipwreck, there's all sorts of things going on them. Look for straight lines, because there are no straight lines in nature. So if you're flying over in a plane and you look down and you see a waterway like here about the middle of the picture that meanders, that is a river. You see a straight body of water, that is man-made, and that is a canal. And so they used to use rivers to transport. Eventually they improved the rivers, and then they made basically homemade rivers called canals. Okay? And eventually they could put a towpath, that's a towpath, and they could tie a team of horses or mules to a barge, and they could transport more stuff than they could if the horses were pulling this on a wagon or on their backs. Okay, moving on. I had fun with this. Overseas trade. Napoleon had insulted England and called them a nation of shopkeepers, but they had a large merchant navy. The British were proud of the fact that they made money and their people were wealthy, and they had cheap goods made all over the world. They had a large merchant navy, and they also had a military navy, the Royal Navy. And there were these two really big companies, the British West India Company and the British East India Company, which is very well known and eventually owns large parts of India. Here's just some graphics for the Royal Navy. You may not think much about the British Navy, but it was the best in the world. And if you're out there running a load of, wheat someplace, and all of a sudden pirates show up, you would be very happy to have the British Navy come in and rescue you. Early mechanization, very important. The big thing was iron and coke. So iron was the basis for making machines, but there's two problems with it. Where do you get the heat, the energy to heat the furnaces to take the iron out of the iron ore? And how do you get the right sort of energy to remove impurities from the iron ore? Because the purest form of iron makes the best machines. And at this time, the principal source of energy was wood. And British were using the wood to make charcoal, and they would burn the charcoal. The problem is they're running out of wood. So here's just, I don't know really much. There's wood and there's charcoal. This is not a science class. Eventually, this guy named Abraham Darby comes along. Remember, you need to know all these names and what these people did. And he came up with this product called coke, which is a byproduct of coal, and you could burn that instead of charcoal. It was more efficient, and England had tons of coal. And Darby's a smart dude. He set his iron plant next to a river, so he had water power that would turn all the turbines or whatever they call those things to power his machinery. This is before the steam engine was invented. So now iron could be made cheaper, lowering prices and spurring the Industrial Revolution. Next, you have steam power, and it's power that's generated by using coal and water. And so the problem is the British had coal mines, especially the rich landowners. Problem is you dig a coal mine down in the ground, fills with water. So they needed a way to get the water out to make it safe for the coal miners to go down there. So this guy named Newcomen invented a steam engine powered by coal to pump out the water. Now, it made iron cheaper and the products made by iron machines cheaper. The problem is that the steam engine was very inefficient. It's going to fall to this guy named James Watt, who's going to improve it and make it what it is. And once he improves it, This is the most important invention of the industrial age. I threw a whole bunch of videos in here. And the industry most of this is put into place using is the textile industry, that is clothing. And before 1750, your clothes were either made out of wool or cotton. Obviously, wool comes from sheep, and cotton is grown. Now, England has no cotton, but England owned the 13 American colonies. Cotton was grown there. When the American Revolution happened, they started focusing on other countries like India, which England would eventually own, and later on, they controlled Egypt, which also grew cotton. After the American Revolution, the British went back to buying cotton from the Americans again, and the Civil War is out of our time period. It's after 1850. But after the Civil War was over, the English went right back to buying American cotton from the southern states. Here's some of your inventions. John Kay's the flying shuttle. Make sure you know his name and what the shuttle did. There is K in the shuttle. Next is Hargreave, and he invented the spinning jenny. And eventually they're going to pair this thing with the steam engine, and they're going to change everything with the Industrial Revolution. There's the spinning jenny. Eventually they're going to take the rivers and turn them into canals. And what they did is originally they started with rivers. They made them more accessible to big cargoes. They would dredge the rivers, okay? Then they would make ports, and a port is an area with water that is deep. So a big ship can come up, it can drop anchor, and the port should be surrounded by land, which means if there's a storm and the ship is there, the waves cannot cross land. It's fairly safe inside the port, and they can anchor the ships next to a dock and load and unload heavy cargoes safely. They improved roads, and they started building canals. Okay? Now you need to know some of these terms here. They dredged rivers and canals. We talked about locks. I told you about a story of me going through a lock on the Ocklawaha River. Towpaths were those things where the animals pulled the barges, and a weir is a primitive dam. And the cities got an act of parliament to help give them the power to develop these industrial centers. Remember, the British Parliament is on the side of capitalism and the development of the Industrial Revolution in their country. And they were very happy that they got it before anybody else. Okay, moving on here, there's a diagram of a lock. Originally, the roads were built by the Romans, and the Romans had been gone for 1,000 years, so the roads were crappy, and they were full of holes. The towns were in charge of improving the roads, but they didn't have any money or any motivation to do it. So the Parliament decided to put businesses in charge. Here comes England's big friend, capitalism again. They bring that in, and they tell a business, you can control this 20 miles of highway. You fix there's not really a highway, it's a dirt road. You fix the holes in the road, and you can charge a toll. And so a lot of rich people and poor people, I'm sure, bought stock, or they invested in the Turnpike Trust. And here's a term for you. If you buy stock in a company, you're a shareholder. And when the company pays you money, those are called dividends. Now, there's all sorts of new types of engineering going on. They built bridges. They learned how to drain off the water in gradients. That's like how steep the roads are. And they helped agriculture and industry because it's cheaper and safer to move stuff up and down these roads. If you're shipping something fragile like pottery and your wagon hits a hole in the road, it's going to break the wagon wheel and break the pottery. Imagine now if you were driving your parents' sports car down a dirt road with holes in it. Much easier to drive on a highway or an interstate. Here's a drawing, I was fascinated with this, of an early toll road in Hyde Park in England. Canals. Now eventually, canals are going to replace rivers, or they're going to go along with them. And the dude who made the most money was this guy called the Duke of Bridgewater. He built a 14-mile canal. His engineers had to build tunnels, locks, and aqueducts. And before this, a horse could carry a quarter ton of coal on his back. After you could take that same horse and hook him to a barge, and he could pull a barge with 50 tons. So imagine the improvement. And the key word there is productivity. Once again, it made coal cheaper, and it made the Duke filthy, stinking rich. Okay, the next big improvement is Parliament got in the act, and they passed all these laws. And there's that word shareholder. And the people who were trained to build these Canals later on are going to use these same skills to build railroads. I believe they're called civil engineers. Population grows, and there's an argument about what was more important, the Industrial Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution. The truth of the matter is they're linked. They went together. Better agriculture, better Industrial Revolution. Why was there rapid growth? At home and abroad, there's a high demand for industrial goods. Okay? So people that were motivated wanted to get in it and make a profit. Here's some key vocab for you. Entrepreneurship. That's somebody with good business sense. I tell a lot of my students, they're used to sitting in class and taking notes. A lot of you, when you get your first job, you're going to find out that you have a knack for making money. And you're going to get promoted to supervisor and manager. And you're going to have a lot of headaches because they're going to put you in charge of a bunch of employees. And people aren't always that easy to deal with. Ask any school teacher their opinion on dealing with human beings. But what happens is, with those promotions comes money. Laissez-faire means let the people do as they choose. And the British government and the American later on had a laissez-faire attitude. They welcomed new businesses and new industries. The concept of free trade is you could trade with other countries. And England's big advantage was their government was sympathetic towards capitalism and industrialization. There are countries that are not sympathetic, and you can decide whether they're as successful as the English and the Americans. Even China has now turned to capitalism. Okay, moving on here. Need to leave off the political editorializing. The other big advantage the English have is there's no other country doing this. And so there's no international competition yet. There will be. And there's an unlimited supply of cheap energy. We're going to skip all this. Here's the big new inventions. Iron. Henry Cort took out a patent on puddling, which makes better iron. I have no idea what puddling is. Just memorize his name. You know what a patent is. That's where the government lets you license your invention, and you get the profit on it for a certain amount of time. Here's a drawing of puddling. I don't know what there's happening here, but it's significant. This is not a science class. The biggest invention is the steam engine. Newcomen invented it. James Watt, notice that's in capital letters. He improved it. Here's the three big changes that happened. Eventually, these improved steam engines can be loaded onto barges from the factories they're made in and shipped all across Britain and later shipped across the ocean to spread the Industrial Revolution around the world. There's Watt and his steam engine. Textiles are the biggest use of this. The Industrial Revolution begins in the textile industry. And after agriculture was the biggest employer in England. And the two big names you need to know, number one is Arkwright. And he invented the water frame. Look at all this stuff as it does. And he makes people more productive. That's how much work you get done. Okay? This video I'm making, I apologize about my raspy voice, is making me more productive because students who missed my class, I can just send them to this video and they can make up what they missed and hear a little bit of an explanation without having me having to do this all over and over. So technology allows me to be more productive. The cotton engine, which obviously has an American connection, invented by Eli Whitney. Know that story. And know about Crompton and the spinning mule because it connects the water frame and the spinning jenny. And before long, there's 4 million spinning mules being used. And these were some of the machines that the Luddites trashed when they broke into the factories. And these are the spinning jennies. This is very advanced. And at the time, England was the only country who had this. All right. Then is developed the factory system. Okay, I spent a lot of time on this. I don't have time to do that now. But make sure you know the name Arkwright. A factory is basically a place where you bring in raw materials. You have workers there. They transport the raw materials into finished goods and they send them around the world to sell them. And here's all the things. And Arkwright, like everything else in life, there's some good things and some bad things. He brought workers in. He built a city for them. He built housing for them. For many of them, the housing was better than what they had out on the farms. The parents were illiterate. He educated them, the children of these illiterate parents. Of course, you could say he was a ruthless capitalist. He was doing this for himself. and he had some weird rules. He built them a place to stay. He made sure they ate, and they had certain basic necessities, and he gave them a vacation every year, but they weren't allowed to leave town. That was really kind of odd. They had to stay in his city. This is his original city that he built, what's left of it. And you can see there a canal there. Canals were the big new improvement. I'm just going to let you look at all these notes here. I'm not going to read it to you and insult your intelligence. But canals connected rivers and the ocean. And they're going to be the primo method of transportation until the railroad comes along. Okay, all right, moving on here. The other name you need to know after Arkwright is Wedgwood. He's famous for the pottery factory, and he did all sorts of things that seem to make common sense now. He made his plates stackable, so they're easy to ship, and they're easy to prevent them from breaking. And this is what the canals look like today. Obviously, they're now just pretty places sitting here. They're very shallow and filled in next to these nice houses. Back in the day, they would have been filled with all sorts of ships, and that street over there is probably an ancient towpath, because once the railroad comes along, the canals are pretty much useless anymore. The name you need to know with the railroad is George Stephenson, and his his locomotive was called the Rocket. And every time I look this up, it gives a different speed per hour. But the English textbook says 48 miles an hour. And he eventually built a rail line connecting the two great industrial cities of Manchester and Liverpool. And when it first opened, 400,000 people rode the railway for the first time. So the government, we're going to learn in the second part of this lecture, whenever I get around to recording it, the British government made sure the fares charged on the railway were cheap. And again, maybe they're being selfish, but the poor people can ride the railways cheaply to get to work and to go from city to city. All right, it's better than canal transport, faster, more reliable, and cheaper. And some people can now live outside of town and ride the railway to work. Okay, so again, going to skip over this, but you need to make sure you pay attention to what Parliament is doing. And this is, I don't know if this is the real rocket or a joke. I think it's supposed to be a replica, and actually maybe the actual rocket. I never did find out. The greater application after railroads is the steamship. And here's some facts for you. And what were the raw materials that they used? Coal. Okay, and here's what coal did. And here's the coal deposits in England. And the other one was iron ore. And here are the iron mines in England. Here's textiles. Now, the big thing with textiles is the British did not have cotton, but they owned the 13 American colonies. And when the American Revolution happened, they started looking around. They eventually dealt with the Indians. They took over India. And later on, they're going to buy cotton from Egypt, which they controlled. And I love talking about the sheep I saw in Scotland. So I'm going to end this part of the lecture with a picture of Scotland, the purple heather in the moors, and the sheep.